Well, I'm very pleased to be here in the Isle of Man on a sunny and slightly blustery afternoon, and I've been joined by Grant Atchison, who I've known for many years. Grant's going to talk to us about the yachting and aviation sector in the Isle of Man. And Grant, if you could start with giving us a little bit more about your own background, please. Thank you.
Well, way back when I left school and university, I decided to join Customs and Excise, and was there for, well, almost 15 years now. So I worked on multiple disciplines here in the Isle of Man, not in the UK, but that was the best part about it, I think. In the Isle of Man, you got the opportunity to work in multiple sectors, not just one, which you tend to in the UK. So we working in registration, customs, excise, investigation, intelligence unit, even was a member of the Customs Border Patrol here on the Customs Cutter.
All
so
right.
very exciting, very diverse sort of job, and enjoyed it for very much for 15 years or so. But the opportunity arose, I think, to step into the private sector back in 2007, and I joined a mid-tier accountancy firm and worked there for just over 10 years, managing the VAT and customs advisory side of that business initially. And that business focused predominantly on the yachting and aviation markets, the business sectors that we were working in. And then I was accepted to the board at Moore Stephens, the corporate service provider license holder there. And then later on moved to another provider to set up a new business yachting and aviation there.
And that's Trilogy, is it?
That was just prior to Trilogy.
Okay.
And Trilogy we set up just within the last year. And it's a brand new company, and just with two other co-founders, we decided it was something we needed to do. The timing was right, and yes, so that Trilogy was born.
How have you found that experience, especially in light of COVID and everything that we've had for the last couple of years?
I think that maybe it was one of the good points of COVID for us. The working from home mentality and attitude and what people were doing at the time, it just meant that there was flexibility in how people were working. Allowed us, I think, to make that step sooner than maybe we possibly would have done. But I was always wanting to get back much more into the VAT advisory work, which in my former role wasn't really something I was getting a lot of time to spend in. I wanted to go back to my roots, doing the VAT and customs advice.
Yeah. And I mean, Trilogy specialise in yachts and aviation, Grant. That's the big thing for them. What sort of yachts and planes are we talking about here? I mean, are we talking about big commercial yachts and commercial planes, or are we talking about privately owned ones?
A mixture of both, really. I mean, what we don't do, certainly on the maritime side of the business, is we don't at the moment at least focus on the commercial merchant ships. We can do that, but we don't tend to, and we haven't done at the moment. But in terms of yachting, it can be anything from a 18-meter sailing yacht that somebody wants to privately own, doesn't want to charter it or anything like that. They just want to have a proper mechanism set up for them. Then we'd get involved to assess and advise and give them some pointers as to what direction they need to go in. And on the aviation side of things, again, if somebody wants a privately owned aircraft, then that's what we'll look to advise them on. But again, if they want to go into chartering, then again, we could look at that. We don't touch the commercial side of the aviation sector, though, at the moment.
Okay. And the Isle of Man is quite noted, isn't it, for its specialist services in the areas of yachting and aviation?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a long history in both maritime and aviation on the Isle of Man. I mean, the maritime marine sector that we have now, which is the Isle of Man Ship Registry, was set up in 1984. So it's been going well over 30 years now. And similarly, the aviation registry has just gone through its 15th anniversary. So it's been established for a long time. The industry's been built around that and grown from strength to strength.
And what does the Isle of Man actually offer in this field?
It depends really what you want. I mean, the Isle of Man, obviously, as you'll know, is a very well known, has a very good standards in terms of Standards and Poor's and AAA rating, white listings, etc. So as a jurisdiction, you're able to create certain structures, whether that's a limited company, partnerships, or whatever it may be, that suits the owner's side of things. And again, the registration allows much more flexibility. It's an independent, I think it's very much seen as an independent jurisdiction. that the majority of other jurisdictions where your planes or boats go to are recognised and accepted.
And Grant, can you talk us through a classic example if someone comes to you wanting your services with, let's say, a private yacht? How would you interact with them? What do you actually do for them?
Well, the first thing, once a client comes to us and identifies that where Trilogy is able to actually help them, we're, as I say, very much an advisory firm. That's what we do. So we will assess, handhold, project management, give guidance to an owner as they're going through the process of buying that yacht or that aircraft.
Yeah.
And so we will be able to sit down and assess their particular circumstances and give them advice about how potentially they could own it, what type of registration they need to consider when they're thinking whether they're operating privately or commercially. And then some clients just want advice. So they just want the tax advice specific to their circumstance of a transaction of buying and operating those assets.
Do they have to bring the yacht to the Isle of Man, or the plane? Do they have to land the plane on the Isle of Man at all?
No, not in every circumstance. No. If for example you're wanting to import your aircraft or import your yacht into the UK or Isle of Man common area, then yes, those assets will physically have to come to the Isle of Man or the UK for that matter.
And does that happen quite a lot?
It does happen quite a lot. I mean, we've done a fair few over the course of this year, and it just comes down to the circumstance. Is it needed? Following that assessment, yes it is, then let's arrange that.
So I suppose you've got to go on some quite attractive yachts over the years.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we had a very impressive large sailing yacht that came here quite a number of years ago, and it sailed all the way from the Mediterranean to the Isle of Man just to get imported.
Yeah.
I spoke to the captain. It stayed out here in the bay, and it was phenomenal to see a yacht of that type and size coming to the Isle of Man.
Yeah. So can we talk a bit more about the VAT advantages that the Isle of Man has, Grant, and how that works for someone who's acquired a new yacht? How do they go about getting those VAT advantages?
I mean, if you're going down the route of a commercial operation, when we're talking about VAT, then obviously what you need to do is you need to get registered for VAT. It's a stringent process, and there's a lot of work that needs to go into it, a lot of documentation that needs to be obtained, planning, business plans, and you need to put a proper case together to the VAT department in order for them to consider that they're going to give you a VAT number. So that's the first sort of hurdle, if you like, to go through the process. Make sure you're getting somebody who can handhold you through that, because it can be the specific information that needs to be put into those applications. Once you've got that VAT number, then obviously you are VAT registered business. Whether the plane or the boat has to come here as part of that process is a sort of a secondary point, but if it does, then you need to handle those importations. And then you need to make ongoing filings, declarations on your VAT returns of the business activity that those companies are actually.
And what sort of business activity do they have to carry on?
So they have to be, it has to be a business.
Yeah.
It can't be the owner wants to buy a plane or a boat, it's completely private, they don't want to pay the VAT and they set up on the Isle of Man. That doesn't happen, it never happens here. So it has to be a business. It has to show that they are actively chartering those assets and using them for business purposes. And basically means that they charter the boats out, whether that's in the UK or the Mediterranean or elsewhere, that they're performing an economic activity.
Who gets to decide whether they are performing the economic activity or not? Is it customs and excise in the Isle of Man?
Ultimately, they have the final say on it, but I think that's why, I mean, we've never had a case that we've presented for a client whereby an application's been refused. That's why it's important to sit down with clients, talk through the process, what are they going to do, how many weeks are they going to charter, how much is the charter, and then we put the case together and therefore customs will review that and sign off on it.
And Grant, typically where do these yachts and planes come from, or where do the owners live? I suppose is probably a better question.
Literally worldwide. I mean, there's no country, I think, that, as far as I'm concerned, I've dealt with that a client hasn't come from. Right. So whether it's American, British, European, African, Asian.
Could be from anywhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it very much follows the sort of spectrum of where the wealth is in the world, and therefore it's the same demographic.
What sort of value are we talking about typically for these?
Wow, I mean, vessels and aircraft can be anything literally from $1 million to $300 million, depending on the size and how big. I mean, there are big vessels being built over 100 meters in these days, and they are in the 200, 300, 400 euro bracket.
And what impact would you say Brexit has had on your business and yachting and aviation generally in the Isle of Man?
I mean, when Brexit first was happening and everyone knew about it, obviously because there was such a large transition period, they knew that it was coming up. There was ability there for people to evolve their business in certain directions. But obviously the biggest thing is that the UK and the Isle of Man are no longer part of Europe. And because of that, it closes a lot of doors with regards to sort of the VAT and customs and structuring, but it also opens a lot of doors, I think, as well, because there are other tax regimes that UK owners, for example, could take advantage of and use the Isle of Man for that it otherwise wouldn't have done.
Yeah, sure.
So I think generally speaking, I think that it's been actually quite positive. It means that the Isle of Man can compete with other jurisdictions that were maybe more favourable, like Cayman Islands. People don't have to go that far afield if they want to set structures up. They can look locally and set up local structures.
Grant, that's been a really well-informed chat through this area. It's a very complex technical area, isn't it? Before we conclude, how do you see the market developing over the next 5 or 10 years? And when I say the market, I mean generally and in terms of the demand for Trilogy services.
I think the good thing about certainly the services that we're currently in at the moment, and whilst we're obviously hoping to expand into other areas where we are in the yachting and aviation space, is that VAT is always going to be something that needs to be considered on these assets that we're talking about. So it's never going to go away. There's always going to be a VAT or a customs question.
And we're talking about considerable sums here, aren't we? VAT,
absolutely. When it's certainly from a UK and an Isle of Man point of view, 20% of the value. When we're looking and when we're advising clients in Europe, then that can be anything up to 27% VAT. So it's a big number. It's always going to be there. These assets are never going to be exempt of VAT, and clients will always have to consider those tax aspects when they're looking at buying those assets. I mean, in terms of a longer term view of 5 to 10 years, where does the market go? It's a very difficult question. At the moment, it's been a very buoyant market. I think COVID's had a lot to do with that.
The bounce back, you mean?
Absolutely, and I think people and owners as well, of a lot of people, first-time buyers are coming to the market of both planes and yachts because they want some security that if there was another pandemic or anything else, then they could be secure in their travel arrangements or wherever they're going to go, or to go to their yacht and spend time there. So I hope it remains buoyant. I don't have a crystal ball and I can't definitely say. I think there will probably be a bit of a plateau and correcting that will happen within the next 5 years. And obviously with things that are happening with the Russian-Ukraine situation and those sort of difficulties.
You must have seen owners of yachts from Russia and Ukraine over the years as well, I guess.
Absolutely, as I say, I mean, we've advised over the years on clients from everywhere, and that does include Russians, and so that market's completely been affected, as it's not just in our sector, but in every sector, obviously, because of what's happening. So that will have an impact on the second-hand market for both yachts and aircraft. But ultimately, I think wealth is always increasing. It, generally speaking, is always increasing, and I think with that, that means that those high net worth individuals and now the younger billionaires that are coming through will want to buy assets more quickly or in a different way with crypto and other bits and pieces. It's going to evolve. So hopefully in a good way.
Optimistic about the future.
I think so.
Grant Atchison of Trilogy, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken.
The latest technical content delivered through global conversations with professionals for professionals.